She never asked his name, just slid the plate of pancakes in front of him each morning with a soft, "Same as always, honey." Margaret Thompson had worked the morning shift at Miller's Diner in rural Kansas for nearly a decade. She moved like clockwork, open by 6 a.m., coffee brewed by 6:10, regulars seated by 6:15. But one chilly Tuesday in October, something shifted. A young boy, no older than 10, wandered in and sat in the corner booth. He had no money, no order, just a water glass and a too-big backpack. The next morning he returned. And the next. Each day, precisely at 7:15, he'd sit in that same booth, always with a book, always alone. After a week, Margaret placed a plate of warm pancakes in front of him. "Cook made extras," she'd say gently, never making eye contact long enough to embarrass him. And so began their quiet rhythm. Pancakes, a nod of thanks, and 40 peaceful minutes before school. Margaret didn't know his story. Didn't need to. She'd known hunger herself once, back when her husband died, and she scraped by waitressing and raising 2 sons. She recognized that kind of emptiness, one that ran deeper than food. Some said she was being taken advantage of. Others said it wasn't her place. But Margaret just smiled and poured more syrup. Because sometimes kindness doesn't need permission. Just a plate of pancakes and someone willing to notice. He never said more than, "Thank you." But every morning he came back. For 6 quiet weeks, Margaret Thompson, a longtime waitress at Miller's Diner in a small Kansas town, noticed a pattern. Each day at 7:15 a.m., a boy, no more than 10 years old, walked in alone. He was small, always wore the same worn jacket, and carried a backpack far too big for his thin shoulders. He'd sit at the corner booth, order only a glass of water, and pull out a book he rarely looked up from. The first few days, Margaret greeted him with a smile and a paper straw. By the second week, she accidentally brought him a plate of pancakes. "Cook made too many," she said gently, placing it on his table without asking. The boy hesitated, then slowly picked up his fork. From that day on, it became routine. Eggs on Monday, oatmeal Tuesday, toast and jam on Friday. He never asked for food. He never gave a name. But every plate came back empty, and every time he whispered the same words, "Thank you." The other staff noticed, of course. Kathy on the grill called him the Stray. Mark, the manager, pulled Margaret aside. "You can't be giving out food. It's not a shelter." Margaret didn't argue. She just said, "I'll cover the cost from my tips." And she did, giving up her own winter coat fund to make sure he had something warm in his stomach before school. Then one morning, he didn't come. Nor the next. Margaret still made his pancakes, just in case. After a week, a photo of the empty booth was posted online with mocking comments. "Feeding ghosts now? Playing charity at a diner?" People laughed, but Margaret didn't flinch, because she remembered what it felt like to be young and invisible. 23 mornings later, 4 black SUVs with government plates pulled up outside the diner. Men in full military dress stepped out. They asked for Margaret. "I'm Colonel David Reeves," one said. "I'm here because of a promise." The boy's name was Adam. His father, Master Sergeant James Thompson, had been killed in Afghanistan. Unbeknownst to anyone, Adam had been living alone after his mother abandoned him, too proud to ask for help. In his final letter, Sergeant Thompson wrote, "If I don't make it back, thank the woman at the diner who fed my boy. She didn't ask why, she just fed him." Colonel Reeves placed that letter in Margaret's hands. Then, before a now silent crowd of diners, he saluted. From that day forward, the corner booth bore a small plaque, reserved for those who serve, and those who quietly serve them. Because sometimes the greatest patriot doesn't wear a uniform. She wears an apron, ties it at dawn, and serves pancakes to a boy who needed someone to notice. The pancakes were ready, but the boy never came. Each morning at 7:15, sharp, a small boy named Adam would quietly slip into Miller's diner and sit at the same corner booth. He never said much, just opened a worn book and sipped on the glass of water waitress Margaret Thompson brought him. For weeks, Margaret pretended that the hot breakfasts she served him, pancakes, scrambled eggs, toast, were kitchen mistakes. "Too much batter this morning," she'd say with a wink. He never asked for food. He never asked for kindness, but he never left a crumb behind either. For Margaret, it wasn't charity, it was memory. Years earlier, she had been that hungry child, clutching a worn-out coat and pretending not to need help. Her father, a World War II Army medic, had once told her, "Real service isn't in medals, it's in moments no one sees." But not everyone understood. "Why are you feeding a stray?" asked Kathy, the grill cook. "They'll just disappear." Mark, the manager, warned Margaret about giving out food. "We can't afford handouts," he said. Margaret just nodded. "Then I'll pay for it. 1 meal a day, that's all." And then, one Thursday morning in November, Adam didn't come. Margaret made his usual breakfast anyway. She placed it at his booth, checked the door, and waited. A full week passed. Still nothing. A few customers laughed when they saw the uneaten pancakes. Online, someone posted a photo mocking Margaret's imaginary charity case. It stung, but she never stopped preparing his plate. On the 23rd day of Adam's absence, everything changed. 4 black SUVs with government plates pulled into the diner's lot. Men in military dress uniforms stepped out in formation. The bell over the door jingled, and Colonel David Reeves of the U.S. Army walked in. "I'm looking for a woman named Margaret Thompson," he said, his voice carrying through the stunned silence. Margaret stepped forward, trembling. The colonel reached into his coat and handed her a folded letter. "This is from Master Sergeant James Thompson, Adam's father. He was killed in Afghanistan 2 months ago. Adam never told anyone he was living alone. But he wrote to his father about a woman at the diner who made him feel seen, who gave him food without asking why. This is his father's last request, to thank you." Margaret's hands shook as she read the letter. Then, in front of the entire diner, Colonel Reeves saluted her. And one by one, every soldier who had arrived with him followed. From that day on, Adam's booth was never empty again. Sometimes the quietest gestures echo the loudest. A plate of pancakes, a warm smile, a seat that says, "You matter." And in those moments, the people who serve without uniforms show what honor really looks like. It was just another quiet morning at Miller's diner, until 4 military SUVs pulled in and everything stopped. Margaret Thompson, a 29-year-old waitress, had worked the morning shift for years. She was dependable, kind, and always early. For nearly 2 months, she had quietly fed a small boy named Adam, a reserved child who came in every day before school, ordered only a glass of water, and buried his face in a book. She noticed he never ordered food, yet his eyes always lingered on the breakfast plates carried past his booth. Without asking questions, Margaret began bringing him warm meals, pretending they were kitchen extras. Pancakes one day, eggs the next. He always whispered, "Thank you," and never once asked for more. To her, it wasn't about charity. It was about dignity. The kind her father, a retired Army medic, taught her to protect. When the boy stopped coming, Margaret felt the absence deeply. She still made his breakfast, still placed it at the booth. People whispered. Some even mocked her online. "Feeding ghosts now?" one post read. She ignored it all, though the ache of wondering if she'd been foolish never quite went away. Then came the morning the black SUVs arrived. The diner's windows shook slightly as the vehicles parked with military precision. Soldiers in dress uniforms stepped out. A man with a chest full of ribbons entered. "I'm looking for Margaret Thompson," he said, scanning the stunned room. Margaret stepped forward, apron still tied, coffee pot in hand. "I'm Colonel David Reeves, Special Forces," he said gently. "I've come with a letter, and a thank you." He explained that Adam Thompson, yes, that Adam, had been the son of Master Sergeant James Thompson, a decorated soldier who had died in Afghanistan 2 months earlier. After his deployment, Adam's mother had left, and the boy, too afraid to speak up, had been quietly surviving on his own. The only nourishment he received came from Margaret's quiet kindness each morning. The colonel read aloud the final words of Sergeant Thompson's letter. "To the woman who fed my son without judgment, you gave him hope. You reminded him and me that kindness still lives back home." Margaret, overwhelmed, accepted the letter with trembling hands as every soldier in the diner stood at attention and offered her a full military salute. From that day on, the booth where Adam once sat bore a small brass plaque, "Reserved for those who serve and those who serve them." The smallest act, a plate of pancakes, a warm smile, no questions asked, had changed a boy's life and honored a fallen soldier's final wish. And it reminded a town, sometimes too quick to judge, what true service really looks like. Sometimes a thank you doesn't come in words. It comes in the form of 12 salutes. A week after the story of young Adam and the quiet waitress Margaret Thompson spread across the community, Rosie's Diner was transformed. What had once been just another roadside diner in small-town Kansas now stood as a quiet monument to service, sacrifice, and the power of unnoticed kindness. Customers who once looked past Margaret now sought out her section. Veterans from nearby towns stopped in, quietly placing their challenge coins or unit patches on the small bulletin board behind the counter, a growing college of gratitude. Near the booth where Adam once sat, Mark, the diner's manager, had hung a small American flag and a brass plaque that simply read, "Reserved for those who serve and the ones who serve them in return." Margaret didn't dwell on the attention. She continued working as she always had, pouring coffee, warming plates, and offering a quiet smile. But one afternoon, a worn manila envelope arrived. Inside was a handwritten letter on lined notebook paper, addressed to her in the uneven handwriting of a child. "Dear Miss Margaret, I didn't know your name until the colonel came, but every morning you made me feel like I wasn't invisible. My dad always told me heroes wear uniforms, but I think sometimes they wear aprons too. When he stopped writing, I thought we were forgotten. But you remembered me. Thank you for not asking why I was alone. I miss Dad. And I miss your pancakes. Your friend, Adam Thompson P.S." I finished the book. It had a happy ending. Margaret read the letter with tears in her eyes, her hands trembling slightly as she pinned it behind the counter. Not for display, but as a reminder of why even the smallest acts of kindness matter. That summer, the diner held its first fundraiser for military families, raising enough to create a small emergency fund for children of deployed service members. Mark quietly matched the donations himself, admitting to Margaret, "You changed something in me. I finally understand why my old man used to give food to the neighbor kids without question." And on a quiet Tuesday morning, nearly a year to the day since Adam first stepped into the diner, Margaret arrived at her shift to find a small coin placed at her station. It was a military challenge coin, engraved with 2 words, "Always remember." She never saw who left it. But that was all right. Sometimes the most meaningful thanks comes not with applause, but with a simple reminder that your kindness made someone feel seen on their hardest day. When a folded letter finds the right hands, everything changes. A few weeks after Colonel David Reeves walked into Rosie's diner with 12 soldiers and a letter from a fallen comrade, life began to settle. But something was different. Margaret Thompson, the unassuming waitress who once served in quiet solitude, was now quietly celebrated for something she never intended to make public. The letter from young Adam, tucked away behind the counter, had become a symbol of something deeper than charity. It was a reminder that someone saw him, cared for him, and expected nothing in return. And in a world that often demands explanations before compassion, that mattered. Soon, veterans passing through town would pause at the diner, not for fanfare, but to leave a coin, a patch, or just a nod of understanding. A small corkboard behind the register began to fill with unit insignias and handwritten thank you notes. Margaret never drew attention to it, but she tended it carefully, like a garden of memory. One spring morning, the local middle school brought a class in for lunch after a field trip. A young girl with bright eyes and an inquisitive voice looked at Margaret and said, "My dad says you're a hero. Do you feel like one?" Margaret leaned in with a smile and replied gently, "No, honey. I'm just someone who knows what it's like to be hungry, for food and for kindness." The girl's teacher, who had overheard, nodded quietly. And that's what we try to teach our students. Hunger isn't always about food. Later that summer, Rosie's Diner held a fundraiser for military families. What began with a few donation jars quickly turned into a community effort. People gave generously, not out of guilt, but out of gratitude. Mark, the diner's manager, once skeptical of Margaret's quiet acts, matched every dollar. "You changed how I see things," he admitted one day. "I used to think kindness needed a reason. Now I know it just needs a willing heart." And then came the final surprise. One morning, tucked under her napkin holder, Margaret found a challenge coin. Not a random one, but custom engraved. One side bore the Special Forces insignia. The other simply read, "Semper Memor." Always remember. There was no note, no name. But she knew exactly what it meant. As she pinned it beside Adam's letter on the board, Margaret whispered, "That's enough." Because sometimes you don't need to know the whole story to know you've done something good. And sometimes the most heroic thing a person can do is feed a child and never ask why he's hungry. For most of her life, Margaret Miller had never thought of herself as anything special. She poured coffee, served pancakes, and offered quiet smiles to those who needed them. But one fall morning, everything changed. It had been nearly a year since young Adam Thompson had walked into Rosie's Diner for the first time, alone, watchful, and hungry. He never asked for help, but Margaret saw the emptiness in his eyes and chose to act without question. Each morning she placed a warm plate of food in front of him, pretending it was a kitchen mistake or a leftover from the griddle. She never asked why he came alone, never pried into his life. To her, feeding a child was just the right thing to do. Then, after Adam disappeared one morning, she assumed the worst. Maybe he'd moved away. Maybe he'd finally told someone he was living without help. Her heart ached with the quiet worry that she'd never know what became of him. That is, until the day 4 black SUVs pulled into the diner's parking lot. Out stepped Colonel David Reeves of the U.S. Army Special Forces, followed by uniformed officers who stood at attention as he entered. The whole diner fell silent. Margaret, mid-shift with a coffee pot in hand, looked up with confusion. "I'm looking for a woman named Margaret Miller," the colonel announced. When Margaret stepped forward, hands trembling, the colonel handed her a sealed letter and shared Adam's full story. His father, Master Sergeant James Thompson, had been deployed overseas when Adam was left to survive on his own. Every day, Adam came to the diner not just for food, but for dignity, for warmth, and for the one person who saw him not as a problem, but as a person. Sergeant Thompson never returned home. But in his final letter, he asked that the woman who had quietly fed his son be found and thanked for preserving his child's hope during the hardest days of his life. That morning, in front of every customer, Colonel Reeves stood tall and gave Margaret a formal military salute. Behind him, every soldier did the same. No one said a word. They didn't need to. From that day forward, Rosie's Diner changed. A plaque was placed at Adam's favorite booth. Veterans and soldiers began stopping by regularly, not just for breakfast, but to say thank you. And Margaret? She went back to serving coffee and pancakes, just like always. Only now everyone knew. Some heroes wear aprons, not uniforms, and sometimes a simple meal can carry the weight of honor, memory, and love. When little Brandon first walked into Mel's diner with his oversized coat and downcast eyes, most people barely noticed. He ordered only a glass of water and sat quietly with his book. But Sarah, the waitress who had worked that morning shift for nearly a decade, noticed everything. She saw the hollow cheeks, the tired posture, and the silent hunger. So she started forgetting kitchen extras on his table. Pancakes, toast, a warm glass of milk. And each day, Brandon returned, never asking for more, just whispering thank you before heading to school. Weeks passed, and one day he stopped coming. Sarah waited. One morning, then two, then a week. Her heart sank. Had something happened to him? Then, one morning, 4 military SUVs pulled up outside the diner. A colonel in full uniform walked straight to her, holding a folded flag and a letter from a fallen soldier, a father who never made it home, but whose son had survived because someone like Sarah had quietly fed him. That child was Brandon. Sometimes, the greatest difference we can make comes not from big gestures, but from noticing the quiet suffering and doing something, anything, with love. Sarah didn't feed a boy because she knew his story. She did it because she remembered what it meant to be hungry and unseen. And that small act echoed into something far greater. If you believe the smallest kindness can change a life, type "I believe" in the comments. And if stories like this remind you of the good still left in this world, don't forget to subscribe for more moments that restore our faith in humanity.